everyone. It's Ruth Dance here, but I am in a different venue, as you may have noticed. I am, for the second time this summer series, I am at a kid's 5th birthday party. So if you do hear any background noise or any children, only 3 of them are mine, or you see anyone falling off a bouncy castle, you know where I am. Welcome to summer, welcome to flexible working, and welcome to day 24 of the summer series. This is a summer series brought to you by Inspiring Workplaces in partnership with H&H, and what a summer of learning it is shaping up to be. 24 days so far, or 23, 24 including today, of inspiration, learning and passion that's being brought to you all. And to close the end of week 5 of the summer series, we're bringing you Perry Timms from PTHR. He's going to be talking to us about inspiring teams, the real unit of change. This is the debut of his content and research that he's sharing with us. It's a super exclusive look just for our community here at Inspiring Workplaces. So a huge, huge thank you to Perry. He's a partner of ours, a friend, and just completely incredible, the work that he does and the research that him and his team do. And they have researched and co-created a lot of work around teams and a different environment for teams and what that looks like in the 21st century world of work. And wow, that does sound really exciting. We're going to be hearing about their research, the experiences, not only from Perry, but also from his clients and from his own team on what creates inspiring teams that lead to lasting change. So let me bring Perry to the stage. Hi, Perry. Welcome.
Hello, Ruth. Hello. Good to be back.
Yes, it's nice. Yeah, because we had you speak at the Global Inspire-a-thon. I couldn't tell you at what time of day or time zone we were on at that point, but I do remember introing you at the Inspire-a-thon, introing your talk. Yeah. And it's great that you're back with us and talking about something completely different and presenting new research. I'm really, really excited for today. And you've moved house. Congratulations.
Moved house. Yeah, exactly. New view behind me. Yeah, colour coordinated books, as you can see.
Yeah, I did notice that, didn't I? And you're well?
Very well, thank you very much. Yeah, the move's been long, but very worthwhile. So I got a new base, and yeah, it's terrific. Thank you.
Good. We won't talk too much about house moves or kids' birthday parties. I'm going to get off the stage. I promise not to go and bounce in the bouncy castle. I promise to listen to your talk the whole way through. But I'll be back for any questions or Q&A at the end. I'll get off the stage and I'll bring your content up, okay? Thanks, Perry.
You, Ruth. That's great. Thanks very much. Thank you. Yeah, so before I get going, what an impressive achievement again from the Inspiring Workplaces team. So that's Matt, Ruth, Stefan and Amy. So thanks for including me. But that little video montage showed you just what you've been up to. So terrific. Day 24. Wow, well done. And a little thanks also to Alice from the team who's put together these slides. experience. Yeah, so I often talk about different elements of the world of work and what's going on inside, I suppose, some of our sort of most known employers and some of those not so known. And when getting the chance to talk to you, I thought, let's have a look at teams. We don't hear enough about teams. We hear a lot about organizations. We hear about some heroic leadership efforts. But I thought, let's have a look at the real unit of change, which I think sits in the team environment. So that's what we're going to cover today. If you want to tweet during this, of course, do. There's my ID at the bottom there. And of course, the Inspiring Workplaces team will be pleased to hear how you're finding this experience on this summer series. So without further ado, a little bit more about what we do. And I said we would talk about us as a team as well. So I founded the enterprise in 2012 when I left my last corporate role, but the team expanded into the shape that it is sort of now around about 2020. And of course, we all know what happened with that year. But what we stand for is the concept of better business for a better world. So we think there's a lot of answers in putting the world to rights that sit within the domain of business and work more generally. So we exist to help people find that, and transforming teams and the way they operate to help people flourish in their work is what is, I guess, our calling. A few accolades at the bottom of the screen that are mine, and a few that are around the team. So we're a pending B Corporation certified organisation. We were awarded a gold status for a 4-day week employer earlier this year, and we're a living wage accredited employer too. So we're really proud of that. So a little bit about us, what we do. People-powered change, lots of autonomous, inclusive ways of working, about the energy that people bring at work, which I spoke about at the Inspirathon earlier this year. And we are very heavily into design and systems thinking and about that next stage in org design, believing in the concept of a more conscious business model and strategy. So that's what we do, and this is who we do it with, as well as color coordinated books. I've got color coordinated logos of clients on screen, as you can see there, but we're really proud of the fact that we'll deal with public, private, non-profit, large, small, startups, scale-ups, well-established, and just a real plethora of very interesting organizations we get the chance to step into. So thanks to them, all full of very high-performing teams. Thanks to them for that. But here's the nature of what I'm talking about. My hypothesis for today is that when it comes to teams, we assume too much about them and perhaps unwillingly deny that that team construct is the most powerful aggregation of human effort. And in the lead up to this, a few social media posts I shared were talking about some marvelous teams that we might know of, like Mercedes F1 and the Netherlands 1974 World Cup squad. And somebody added very nicely the GB Olympic team from recent efforts. But yeah, these are all in the sporting endeavour periods, and we see that. So I think what I'm going to try and talk about is less of organisations and one about accumulated team gains. I think that's what the whole essence of this will be about. So I'll happily unpack that for you. Before I do, I want to share with you some research around things like development and particularly around leadership. You'll probably hear a lot about this, about how much we invest in it, about how important it is and how significant it is in the shape and construct of organizations. So in looking at Forbes and LinkedIn Learning, I worked out £366 billion is spent globally on leadership development, and it came in at around about 57% of what L&D teams were prioritized on spending and focusing on. So more than half on leaders, and of course leaders make up not an insignificant number within the workforce and operate as teams themselves, but that leaves a lot to be desired about the 43% that's distributed across the mass of employees and people holding down roles and jobs. So an interesting statistic around that one. And then we do a bit of comparison. So team development. So the statistics I could find on this were showing that about $420 per person per year in the US is spent on team development. And compared to that, $1,320 per leader per year. So there is already a distortion in investment in leaders as a group and perhaps individuals, and then teams and their construct. Not particularly pleased about that. Feels like there's an imbalance, but I just thought that would give us a fairly interesting backdrop to start thinking about what do we really value. And it feels like we're leaning very strongly towards leaders, not necessarily teams. However, again, looking at some research, so O.C. Tanner, Gary Hamel, Michele Zanini, and others have been looking at the construct of some unorthodox teams or high-performing teams or standout, amazingly sort of constructed units of people bringing together all sorts of amazing things to happen. So organizations like Udacity, Dell, Target, Adobe, PepsiCo, and Spotify were named in some O.C. Tanner research as showing some amazing team attributes, some incredible togetherness, some outstanding achievements, low attrition rates, high performance, all sorts of things that I guess you would denote as the hallmarks of a successful team. And a couple that I'll draw out on here that I've got some experiences of myself. So Handelsbanken is a Swedish-based financial institution that has a footprint across particularly Europe, and has an incredibly unique team setup. For example, in their recruitment, what they do is they have an extremely sort of spread bet on who you talk to when you are applying for a role at Handelsbanken. So you don't just have an interview with 3 people in a room, you have smaller conversations with teams and different and diverse kind of backgrounds and different professional disciplines, because the idea is what's really going on in those conversations is what do you value, how do you sort of set yourself in terms of working practices, team ethos, and so on, because they're looking at a really strong correlation between how Handelsbanken wants to be as an organization and how you show up as an individual. So this is not some way of creating a homogenous, you must fit our culture, but it is a way of saying we have a very unique way of operating, and we want to make sure that what you bring is both diversifying that and also enhancing and strengthening what we stand strongly in and believe in. And as an example of team construct at Handelsbanken, if somebody comes to them who has branch management experience, rather than them saying, can you move from St. Albans to Middlesbrough to set up our Middlesbrough branch? If that person happens to be in the St. Albans area, but Handelsbanken don't have a branch in St. Albans, they'll say, right, we'll build a branch around you and you can assemble the team that are going to create that entity for us. And I think that's pretty unique in the nature of how teams are constructed and how organizations geographically and sort of functionally spread. So incredible stuff that goes on there. And Barry Wehmiller is an American-based huge organization, multi-billion-dollar industry that helps fit out factories and processing units with conveyor systems and all sorts of engineering that gets goods from production lines into our homes. And they have a couple of really strong factors around how they expand and increase their sort of market share. And they do grow by acquisition, but their important criteria isn't in the uniqueness of the product line of the company they're looking to merge with, but how that company treats its teams of people, how people are cared for, looked after, advanced, developed, and supported in work they do. So they almost have like a people-centric approach to how they acquire and build their business. And one of their most famous statistics that I absolutely love is when they realized that actually some of their working ways were so conducive to teams looking after each other and people having a very harmonious work-life integration. They realized they had the lowest divorce rate of any organization in the US. So they made it a KPI so that they could keep an eye on the balance they were striking between home life and work life. Terrific example there. So yeah, what do these have in common apart from those stories I like to tell about them? Some of this kind of statistic is about sentiment, some of it is about performance, but generally speaking, the organizations that we just saw and looked at very briefly are around about 121% more motivated. So people are reporting an energy towards their work and a sense of commitment and value and determination, and they're absolutely positive. Their contribution individually and at team level is incredibly important to them. And they also report kind of 2/3 of people said that the inclusive environment that's created in some of those workplaces helps them get to know their team members better. They understand what's going on in their life. They understand the different experiences they are bringing into that team. And I think that social fabric and social cohesion is so important and has been throughout things like the COVID-19 pandemic responses, where people have connected, bonded even through screens. But they also generate more revenue. There is genuinely a correlation, maybe not a causality, but a correlation between teams that are cohesive, that look after each other, are very high support, and more revenue. Backed up by people like Amy Edmondson's research into psychological safety as an example. Safer teams in an environment where they can look out for each other are naturally inclined towards revenue generating activities, customer satisfaction and opportunities being created. And also product diversification. One of the companies on the slide before is a massive steel organization, headquarters in Seattle, called Nucor. And if you look into how that organization works, they encourage an experimental and innovative approach in their steel workers who can change the consumption of materials to be more ecologically friendly. They look into distribution routes to save fuel and create more greener outcomes for their transportation, all because in that organization it's about teams spotting an opportunity, working to create something that will add value, create revenue and build a stronger connection to the work they do. So product diversification and lower attrition costs, I mean, the whole thing stacks up economically. And yet, if you go back to where I started, 57% of what we spend on learning goes towards leaders, not teams, leaders. So very interesting statistical imbalance maybe on revenue invested in teams. And then looking at some research from Martine Haas, who's a professor from Wharton School of Business in Pennsylvania, and Mark Mortensen from the International Business School based in France, INSEAD, has looked at the dynamic of teams in the kind of modern climate. So this is particularly relevant to now, particularly relevant to a COVID-19 type pandemic, both mid and post-pandemic. What they saw in teams is it is no longer just to throw people together, instruct them, almost indoctrinate them and just synchronize their activities. These 4Ds came through some extensive research they looked into around a number of organizations across the world who picked out these 4 qualities of what they're seeing in the more complex environment that teams are now operating in: multi-geographical, multidisciplinary, and multi-complex challenges that they're trying to solve. Firstly, they're more diverse. And by diverse, we mean the kind of characteristics of people, where they're born, their race, gender, ability, and so on and so forth. So the makeup of the team and a link to success. The more diverse the team, the more creative, successful, and the more together it seems to be. So that's an important attribute for us to think about too. They're certainly more dynamic. There's something about their ability to change, adapt and respond is a key element of a successful team. Not just, I know what I'm doing, I'm fixed. Absolutely not the case. I can spot the opportunity, I can sense the shift that's needed and bring that adaptation in how we as a team interoperate, decide, review and set ourselves to succeed. But then also totally relevant to now, digital and dispersed, not just pandemic. A lot of the research that Martine and Mark did was pre-pandemic. We're talking 16, 17, 2000. But digitally connected teams across different time zones, different geographies, even in the same country, are forced in the nicest possible way to converge on digital platforms. So I think we've started to see this sense that we create a strong connection, we communicate synchronously and asynchronously, and we use digital tools that bring us together to do the work we're doing. And I'm sure we've all experienced that over the last 18 months. And of course, by nature then dispersed. Most teams that we're now starting to see forging into a new kind of model are not geographically or proximity based necessarily. It used to be the team construct was you sat in the same group of desks. Absolutely not the case anymore. Far flung, dispersed, digitally connected. So some really interesting stuff there. A terrific example of how this plays through was in a Japanese pharmaceutical company called Takeda, which also had a US-based organization. And in an attempt to create some unity, the leaders within the US and Japan team said, well, let's alternate when we all get together. So one week, the US team will connect at a time that's late in their day, but early in the Japanese team's day. And then we'll flip it. And then the Japanese teams will connect late and the US teams will be on early, so they could have that cohesion. And what was noticed was that the US team were always connecting from home, and the Japanese team were always connecting from the office. And so it felt like it was a fair split, but actually it wasn't. The Japanese team ethos was, we need a separation between home and life. So therefore, if we're needed later in the day, we'll be in the office, not at home. And that's important to distinguish between the two. Whereas the US teams were leaving the office, going home, having tea, seeing the family, and then connecting. And nothing was realized about the imbalance and unfairness until they actually sort of started to talk more openly about how equitable that was. So this shows you how teams can be set up, but also need to kind of adapt and adjust and really look into what the dynamic is amongst them. Now, not sure if anybody's ever heard of this guy, J. Richard Hackman. If I were to say he's the godfather of teams, that would probably be exaggerating it somewhat. But if I were to say that he's the godfather of research into teams, that would not be an exaggeration. So Richard's work came from his organizational psychology professorship at Harvard Business School. And so what he's done is spent 40 years, he died in 2013 sadly, but he spent 40 years researching teams. So if you go back into the 1970s and through, that's where Richard has continually looked up to the point of his departure from our mortal realm. But what he found over those years of research is really, really interesting, because it absolutely still applies now. And I think it's really strong that we bring Richard's work back into focus. So if you've not heard of Richard Hackman before, please go and look up his work. So what he found was there are 5 crucial factors for teams, not personality and attitudes, not that kind of cohesion of behaviors and almost that sterilized approach that perhaps we look for in teams where everybody's on an equal sort of element. But no, he said these are the crucial factors. All teams have to have a compelling direction. They have to know why they're together and what they're headed towards, what they're there to do, what their mission, cause, purpose, whatever you want to call it, the compelling direction that they can follow. And then within that, they also have to have a strong structure. Now, bear in mind, a lot of Richard's research was 70s, 80s, 90s through. We would tend to think about that as very kind of tight boxes of responsibility and interoperations between them. What we would probably say now is that maybe there's a bit more porous and pliable nature to that, but it can still be a strong culture. It can still be a structure that is built but has flexibility and adaptability, but it still needs to be strong. They need to be bound in a way that they're really certain about. It then has to have a supportive context, and I think that's a kind of no-brainer really, but it's teams looking out for team members, people looking for deficiencies in relationships and trying to correct those, and looking for differences and how to work with those rather than separate and withdraw. So the supportive context was incredibly important, and those teams I talked about earlier on at places like Adobe and WD-40 are an exemplar of an amazingly supportive culture and context within their operation. Now, interestingly, when Richard did a lot of this research, coaching probably wasn't as strongly profound in the business sense as it is now. So he kind of coined this competent coaching phrase, I think, as he started to probably emerge into the latter part of his research. But what's really interesting about this is that we're talking peer-to-peer, not just manager to team member. So we are talking about the team coaching each other, both in new learning and knowledge, in how people are, in adaptation and change, in creativity, channeling into productive behaviors and outcomes. So yeah, competent coaching. And then he coined this phrase, a real team. And I kind of looked into this because I thought, a real team, what does he mean by that? Because that's quite a sort of a vague statement in some respects. But his response to that was not a group labeled as a team. And I think we see this a lot in organizational life. A group of leaders, a group of specialists, you're a team. Well, you may look like a team because you're a collection of people, but you're just a group sometimes because you've got individual strands of practice. You may be in an individual sort of level within an organization, but you're not necessarily a team. You're not that cohesive. You don't have that compelling direction about you as a unit of people coming together. So I think that's one distinction to make, not just a group labeled as a team. And then also not this one anything. You often see this, we are one whatever. What Richard found is that's almost like a little bit of hyperbole, a little bit of an attempt to create a cohesion and a bond that may not actually be the right and most appropriate thing to do. You don't just get teamwork by calling it one anything. And then he says this thing about not just people being nice to each other. I think what Richard found was in a strong structure with a compelling direction, there's a lot of support that can come from challenge, a lot of coaching that can be brought into disagreements and disturbances within the team dynamic and the team chemistry. So it isn't just about people being nice to each other. It absolutely is about critical friends, challenges, and holding space to do things differently. Great work from Richard there. And then the other person to refer to is Sigal Barside, who again teaches at the Wharton Business School in Pennsylvania, who around about 2014 wrote a piece that kind of really blew up because it talked for the first time about love in the workplace. And we're not talking about romance here, we're talking about companionate love. And Sigal's research was looking into organizations like Médecins Sans Frontières, fire and rescue teams, people working in crisis situations, people working in different shifts within different environments. And what she found was in some intense environments, there was an enormous amount of affection that was built up between people in teams because they had to rely on each other. They formed into a bond and a cohesive kind of band where it wasn't just a kind of let's get through the day by asking how your evening was. Let's really find out who you are, what matters to you, and how we can work with each other based on an understanding that's deeper than a kind of simple friendship moniker. So she kind of broke it down into constructs, mechanisms, and outcomes, which sounds very academic, but really I think what she was trying to do was say this is not some wishy-washy flim-flam thing here we're talking about. We are talking about people who would go into dangerous situations and they would have an affection and a feeling of love towards their colleagues that would mean they're looking out for them as well as themselves. So that there are some assumptions about what we mean by the phrase companionate love. So it goes beyond the social exchanges and norms into much of a deeper relationship and binding sense of we're in it together. And I remember Simon Sinek talking to some Marines in the US about their sort of rescue of comrades who were wounded and the fact that they put their own lives in jeopardy to go and rescue their comrade. And Simon said, well, what was it that made you go into a dangerous situation where you probably would have died trying to save one of your colleagues who was injured? And their response was so simple, but so in tune with this companionate love. They said, they would have done it for me. I mean, that kind of bond is just very difficult to describe how powerful and intense that can be. But the outcomes of organizations who expressed companionate love in Sigal's research and in her paper was less withdrawal from the workplace, greater engagement in hospital nature, better patient outcomes, and better family outcomes, talking to the Barry Wehmiller example I gave earlier on. But what is a team? So rather than kind of give you some sort of dictionary definition, this is my take based on working with clients and seeing how teams operate and don't operate so well, and also with the team PTHR who've been together now for about a year and a bit. We've strongly found that being really clear, so compelling direction, behaviours and responsibilities into accountabilities. What can I stand in that you can hold me to account on, and what will I step into and show I'm being accountable for is incredibly important. And how we do that at PTHR is we take a very simple principle from self-managed organizations. We have something called team agreements. So we get together, we work out what's really important to us, and that might be that when I need some help, I can ask for it and there's no judgment. When a deadline is set, I respect that deadline and it doesn't get breached. Those kinds of things form into a bit of a kind of charter between us. But we found that clarity and accountability is absolutely the essence of understanding how we need to operate. And one of the team recently had an incident where her mum was really ill. She was due to step in for a client in the afternoon. And she sort of said, no, I can do it. But there was a sense that that wasn't the right thing to do. So we reorganised, we stepped in, we allowed her to spend time thinking and caring for her family. We picked up the work. We didn't make a fuss about it, but it just showed that sense of togetherness. It was like, that's more important than anything. So, these are the sort of things that matter. They're small gestures. It was a couple of hours. We adjusted and stood in, made a lot of difference. So I think these are the sort of things that express the difference between a group of people and a team that's together. And I think these attributes of optimal performance, we tend to get really focused on that one, but about this cohesion and adaptability, super important in every team I've looked at and worked with, that cohesiveness is there, but we're also adaptable and can shift and change as things need to. And setting principles. I mean, I love company values that are really, you can tell they're kind of crowdsourced and they're at the real heart of what the company's about. But often you look at a value and go, I'll use one that appears a lot, integrity. It's like, okay, nice word. What does that look like? What does it mean when I'm spotting somebody acting with integrity versus without integrity? So we love principles, and we start to unpack a value into a series of principles. It doesn't mean you have to carry around a huge document to understand what we mean by some of those principles, but we craft them, we talk about them, we use them, and we bring them to life, because I think what they do is bind us. They give us a real sense of what we mean by our principled levels of operation. And then I think there is this equation of what people value and what the organization's there to create as value. And we keep an eye on that. Is that important to you? Is that important to the client? And we just make a kind of correlation and connection between those two things. But we didn't stop there. We put it in a model. And it's quite literally a model that can be used to build or diagnose or adapt. Value on the left side, the reason for being, the meaning for the organization, what individual meaning means. Work through systems using human energy. Outcome we're after is flourishing. A flourishing organization and team, and a flourishing person within that. And then all the bits in the middle are all the things that we put together to channel both the energy and the systems towards that optimal performance, to that understanding, that clarity piece. And you'll see accountability, clarity, and togetherness sit right at the heart of this. And if they're not working well, if development's a little bit ropey, therefore people aren't feeling fulfilled, we can go back and say, is that in the design, or is that in the principles, or is that in both? Put it right, work it through. That's the idea behind this model. It's diagnose an obvious point of failure, but look back at where perhaps that failure occurred in something else that isn't just on the presence and the surface of what we're now experiencing. So we call this 42 at work model, and it's built deliberately with that name, because if you know the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the answer to life, the universe, and everything was 42. So we think this is the meaning of teams, work, and people. And so let's have a quick look at agile teams, because that's the kind of word of the year, I suppose. Hybrid and agile are definitely what we've been doing a lot of. But I think what we're seeing, going back to the research from Martine Haas and Mark Mortensen, teams these days are built on a sense of transient, i.e. they may not be together forever, but also togetherness while they're there. So teams aren't as fixed as they used to be, perhaps. It might feel like that, but there's definitely a movement around matrix and different projects and so on and so forth. And everything I look at around teams will talk to you about autonomy. It will talk to you about people having a sense of direction and control that they can bring. But that also needs to come with that collective responsibility. So yes, I can direct myself through an autonomous approach, but I am collectively responsible to the rest of my team. So I think there's something in that. And then I think there's this thing about transparency. How am I feeling? What am I up to? Am I behind? I've let you down? Whatever it might be, transparency. So we all know what's going on, but also use that in a decompression sort of way. Don't hold the issues. Don't hide from problems. Surface them, because when we're more transparent about them, we can help as a team collectively solve those problems. And then I think this kind of push and pull between adaptability and certainty. Certainty seems incredibly fleeting these days. We should strive for it, but recognize that as soon as we've found it, we probably need to adapt that sense of certainty to navigate the complex world we're in. And so people have found themselves operating now in squads and huddles. We're sort of debureaucratizing work processes. We're saying we don't need to do that because we talk a lot. We don't need a report because we can see where the work is. So I think we've got a chance to take, as Gary Hammond and Michele Zanini have found, about $3 trillion out of the cost of work by debureaucratizing. And we need to know what we're up against. How much work is there? How big is it? And can we allocate ourselves to that to do it? Much more science, I think, is needed in how we understand workloads and volumes. And then let's not have all these draining meetings. Let's have smart stand-ups. Let's do show and tells that bring people into our thinking and our work. And let's operate on Scrum boards so that we can see what we're all up to and we can all pile in and help each other out. That's the kind of team I'm talking about. And also, let's not forget hybrid working. So, I mean, that's the thing of the day. And I think we're probably looking in the wrong place. We're saying what matters for the building we're in? Nope. What matters for the individual? Well, yeah, but that could get very chaotic. I think we work this out in teams that work together, say, when do we need to be together? When do we work in a dispersed sense, but we're still together in spirit and on digital platforms? And here's an example. Here's Team Alpha. They spend Monday and Friday in the office because they choose to, and they spend Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday not in the office because they choose to. So they move their work around so that they get the optimal experience of in office and they can do all the other stuff out of the office. But they might work with Team Beta, and Team Beta work differently. They say we want to do 3 days where we're not in the office and then 2 when we are. Now, if you're Team Alpha and Team Beta, but you need to get together, what do you know? You're both in on a Friday. That could be when you need to come together as 2 teams. So I think that's how we do it. We have teams who construct their MO, and then they work with other teams to say, hey, we need to collaborate. How do we make this work? Do we do it all virtually on a Wednesday, or do we do it in person on a Friday? I don't think it's any more complex than that. Let's have teams work out when they're in, when they're out, and what they're doing. And what does what they're doing look like? Work comes at us. It's often on a technology system anyway, if we're knowledge workers. And we use different threads and apps and so on to process that work and to chat to our teams and colleagues. And we get information out of technology systems. So we need to populate that, manage that. And then ultimately we manage the work, we size it, we deliver it, we do it. And this is all the stuff that teams have the architecture around them for, and teams need to work out the system, the process and the flow. So I think we're taking that away from a manager being dominant, directing and controlling, and I think we're bringing more of that kind of team cohesion in how they construct their way around platforms, devices, work, decisions and so on. So yeah, teams are your prime unit of impact and change. That's my deduction from the hypothesis. Recognize, so here's some tips. Recognize the need for an anchoring base camp. So even if a team's and people are very transient across different teams, it's nice to have them sort of anchored in a practice community or a knowledge group or a chapter, because they do need to belong somewhere. So you might have a home base, and then you might have different dispersed ways of working across different teams, but designed for those expeditions. So if they leave their base, they go into another team for a while, then they come back, then recognize that some of that is about this transient movement, agile based, some of it's perhaps more static. And if it's static, bring stimulus in. If it's transient, bring consistency in terms of experiences. So I think there's a way we can manage the deployment of those teams, no matter where and what and how they're working. And then I think we've got this opportunity to create more multi-skilled, multidisciplinary, diverse, adaptability-friendly people who can go and huddle over a problem, disassemble, form again in a different unit. And I think this is where we can start to see product, service and value creation being something that's determined by teams, not by boards and committees. And then I think we can start thinking about the alignment, the accountability, clarity and togetherness I keep talking about. Agreements, charters, commitments. Let's get them. Every time we come together in a team, how are we going to do it? What can we rely on? What do I know about you? What do you need to know about me? Boom, relationship based. And there's the team I work with. So if you want to get in touch with us about any of this teamwork, website, my email address, Twitter, whatever it is. But yeah, we're flexible, part-time, lots of working mums, work at different times. We manage it synchronously, asynchronously, strong cohesion, enormously powerful culture. And I just thought I'd thank them publicly for being a great team now. That's me done. I'll go back to Ruth and see where we're at.
Perry, wow. Just like, wow, my brain is brimming right now. Like, just whirling with so much. I need to go and watch this again. It's so good that this is available on demand as well, right? Like,
thank you for so much research and case studies and thoughts and ideas and things that people can steal, right? Exactly.
So much. Really got me thinking. There's been so much talk about the new world of work and being agile will help you thrive, etc., etc. And that ownership is almost sitting at the moment with internal comms or employee engagement or HR or the senior leadership. And in fact, this is just showing us that it sits with every single person. And the key to it is how you work, how you work together, how you work in your team, not it being something done to you by leadership or by a certain business function. So interesting. And like I said, I need to go back and watch that without a bouncy castle in the background, without being at a kid's party like I am right now, because there's so much I think that we can learn in our team as a small team. Even there's so much I could probably learn with my husband, right? We often talk about ourselves as a team and how we operate. We're a family of 5. There's so much in there. Thank you so much. We've got a question coming from someone in our team actually who's watching. Question coming from Stefan. Great talk, Perry. How do you integrate more independent or solo-minded workers into a team? People who maybe naturally prefer to be on their own.
So there's a couple of things. So thanks for the question, Stefan. And it's a great one because I guess when we look at particularly the technology teams, there are lots of people there who are like, I just want to put my buds in code. I don't need any of this fluff and guff. But actually, if they're having a bad day, they might want somebody to notice. They might want somebody to support them. So I think what you do is you find out more about people. And I saw this lovely concept during COVID-19, which is a user manual about yourself. You write a user manual saying, this is how I work, this is what I don't like, this is what I love. If you want to get me in a good mood, this is what I enjoy. And just socialize that. Just make that something that people go, I totally get you. Now, I think that means you can then start to contract with people and say, when I'm going deep into something, I just need the time to do that. Then I'll surface and maybe we'll have a little bit of chat because I'll need the energy and the stimulus. But I think that's how you do it, because I think teams are still made up of individual contributions and there's a wraparound about looking after each other. So I think just talk about it like that. Social support, practical, pragmatic, professional application, just sort of sequence them when it's right to do for the people in the team. That's how I'd say that.
Thank you. Yeah, I like the piece around re-energizing with each other. You work in your own way, but you re-energize with each other. The team that I work with, the Inspiring Workplaces team, we got together very briefly yesterday because it was Matt, our founder's surprise 40th birthday. Well, it wasn't a surprise to him, right? He knew he was turning 40 that day, but we did a quick surprise lunch. We got together and we were talking about how do you all want to work? Like, where should we work? Where should we fix our office now? Like, how should we work? And it was interesting. We're all very different. We all have very different styles, personality preference, working styles, learning styles, whatever it is. But actually, the thing that we all agreed on, irrespective of who we are and how we operate, is that we get energy when we're together. So that kind of re-energizing together, irrespective of whether you're an extrovert or an introvert or whatever.
Exactly that. Yeah. I think that's a really important point.
Stefan just said thank you. That's a great idea on the manual. So
nice one. Use a manual. Yeah, do it. Yeah. To your point on introversion and extroversion, one of the things that people would always label about me is like, he's screaming extrovert. And when I do Myers-Briggs type indicator, it looks that way. Now, since COVID-19 and working a lot in an isolated sense, people would say, you must be going mad. I'm like, actually, I think I've really discovered some of my powerful introversion tendencies that weren't allowed to play. And now I really value a bit of solitude and deep working and stuff. So the team and I have sort of responded to that. And we have a technology platform that mocks an office. It's like a virtual office. And we can lock our door so that we can have a bit of deep time. And we all respect that. But when the door's not locked, we can just pop in and say, hey, how you doing? And it's really nice. So I think there are different ways you can wire it. Yeah, that's great. Well, Perry, it's a Friday afternoon. My kids are going wild on the bouncy castle. It's been amazing. I need to go back and watch this
over and over again. Thank you so much. Honestly, thank you so much for sharing all that research and content. Well done to everyone over at the PTHR team and the lady on your team that put the presentation together as well. Alice, well done, Alice. That was absolutely phenomenal. Thank you so much.
Cheers, Ruth.
So that is bye, Perry. Bye, Perry. So that is the close of week 5 of the summer series here with Inspiring Workplaces in partnership with H&H. We have just less than 2 weeks to go until we finish the summer series. We bring it to a conclusion, and also just less than 2 weeks to go until the Global Inspiring Workplaces Awards, where the finalists are announced. So it's going to be a busy few weeks. It's going to be packed with learning and inspiration, I'm absolutely sure. And what I cannot guarantee is that if this won't be the last time that I'm going to be somewhere at a summer series hosting to you, where I've got a superhero bouncy castle in the background. So I'll just show you the bouncy castle. Yep, that's me. That's where I am at the summer series. So it's a huge thank you. I'll see you next week. We've got Santander, we've got the Dorchester collection, and plenty of other case studies. But from me, from the birthday party, from Inspiring Workplaces, a huge thank you to Perry and to everyone listening. Bye.
Oh, no, not that far. That's electricity. Danger.